One of the things that we've added this year to the seminar is that we've added a couple of sessions that deal with pastoral helps, preaching and pastoral helps specifically in certain areas. And one of those is the preaching of weddings and funerals. You know, I think it's easy whenever we, like as a young preacher, you come in, myself included. I mean, my dad was a pastor all my life, and I thought, you know, I could, no problem until, yeah, you have your first funeral and even your first wedding, and you realize, well, maybe I didn't have all this figured out. Maybe I could sure have used some help. So we want to try to offer those helps. And I know a lot of you know Brother Tom Ross from Mount Pleasant Missionary Baptist Church in Chesapeake, Ohio. So we're looking forward to what you have for us today on preaching wedding, funerals, and weddings.
Thank you, brother. Really appreciate this seminar.
That's right.
And the topics that are being dealt with, because I think it's so important as preachers that we are continually learning and being challenged to grow and learn. And I think this is really, really excellent material. And I was going over a lot of the subjects with my wife, and she said, wow, man, there's some really juicy subjects there. My wife loves studying the Bible. This morning, she was trying to explain to me John Gill's idea of the Antichrist. And I wasn't feeling real good, and she was way over my head this morning. But anyway, I showed her all the subjects, and she said, wow, that's a lot of juicy material. She said, now, what is it you've got to teach on? And I said, funerals and weddings. She said, now how do they know that's the two worst things you do? She said, you're just not very good at either one of those. And now, she's a great supporter of the ministry. We've been married for 35 years, but I didn't realize how much she really didn't like my funeral messages. But as I thought about all these subjects, when I was looking at it, I thought, you know, whoever arranges all the topics, they must have thought, how can we put one on Tom Ross? We'll just, I know what it is, we'll put him in the funeral and the wedding lane. Well, we're going to start with funerals, and my notes may be a little different than the PowerPoint. This is my very first time ever using a PowerPoint. But the word funeral never occurs in our English Bible, but it's an event that every single Baptist preacher must be prepared to participate in during the course of a pastoral ministry. And it is telling that there's very little training whatsoever on how to actually do a funeral. But you're going to be called upon to preach the funerals of your church members, your family members, their friends, their acquaintances. And the more involved you get in your community, you're even going to have a wider sphere. And I believe every pastor should be involved some way in your community. You should be contributing something to the community in which you live. With me, it was always through sports. My boys loved playing baseball, football, basketball, so it was a natural fit. I was president of the Little League. I coached a little bit. I'm still involved with our local high school with a basketball invitational that raises money for scholarships. But what happens is the more involved you are in your community, you're going to have people that ask you to do the funeral of their family that you don't really know much about. And this has happened to me several times. And I've always believed, and I like the philosophy, Some of you may have known Harry Balmer. He was an old country preacher. And he once told me that he would preach at the drop of a hat, and he would drop the hat. And I always thought, that's a great philosophy that a Baptist preacher ought to have. And especially with regard to funerals. I endeavor to preach them whenever I'm asked, regardless of the circumstances, whether they're lost or saved. But I want people to know that I'm available, because this is a very vulnerable time in people's lives. And all of the funeral directors where I live in our county, especially in South Point and Chesapeake, know that all they'd have to do is give me a call, and I'd be glad to fill in a pinch. What I'm going to do today is give you some simple directions and suggestions based on what I've done in the last 38 years when I've been called upon to perform funerals. Now, I know some of you think I'm only 38 years old. That how could it be that I've been preaching that long? But I don't want to burst your bubble. I'm a little older than that. But every preacher is different. So, this is not meant to be hard fast. Well, before the funeral service, when a member of the church passes on, you're the one that's going to be called upon. The pastor must be ready to help, to comfort, and advise at a moment's notice. Meaning that you never clock out as a pastor. You got to be ready for anything, even one of the most trying things that a family will ever go through, the loss of a loved one. Now, it's absolutely essential that you keep this in mind in your ministry. People are going to die. It's inevitable. Death is unexpected, but you've got to be ready at all times, because you're usually going to be the first one that they call. And I'm telling you, there's going to be times where it is so very difficult. The last funeral I preached, a man shot him. He killed himself. And it was especially difficult. But normally when a member or a member's family passes away, the first thing I do is call them or visit them to offer any assistance that I can. I just want them to know, hey, anything you need, I'm here for you. Anything I can be a help to you. It's absolutely essential that the people that you minister to know that you care about them and care about that situation that they're in. Be there for your people. Encourage them. Comfort them. Be prepared to weep with those that weep. I was away in a meeting one time, and a lady that's not even a member of our church, but who attends our church regularly, she went to our church when she was a little girl, and now she's like 85 years old. And I was away in a meeting preaching, and I was staying where I was preaching. It was about 4 hours away. And I get a call on my cell phone, and Sister Lundy said, Brother Ross, Dallas has just passed. I need you to preach the funeral. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to work this out. I'm 4 hours away. I'm in the middle of a revival meeting. But I said, I'll be there. Because you've got to be there for your people. I worked it out. God worked it out. But they need to know that you care about them in this most vulnerable of times. But after my initial contact with the family, my wife and I, this is just something I've done I've been at Mount Pleasant for 25 years. First thing I do is I find out when the funeral is going to be, and then I order a meat and cheese tray from Walmart. And my wife and I give that to the family as a gift, because normally what happens is they're going to have people coming in and out of their house. And, I think food really helps a lot during times of bereavement. And so then I also ask them if they want our church to prepare a dinner for them after the services. We've got a little annex building. They call it an annex building. I call it a fellowship hall or whatever. But anyway, we always, if they're connected to our church, we always offer them use of the building, and we pay for everything. Our church, our ladies pitch in. Now, if they don't request a formal meal, folks in our church will often take food over to the family. And they'll have friends and relatives coming in and out, and it's nice to have food available. That's one less thing that family's got to worry about, is how am I going to feed everybody that's coming in and out. Now, you may think that's kind of a trivial thing, but sharing a meal after a loss with loved ones often helps those that are grieving. I've seen it so many times when they come after the funeral service to our fellowship hall, to our annex, and I see how that just kind of brings everybody together. Don't underestimate the power of food and fellowship in the healing process after death. Now, another thing that you're going to find is when you're called upon to do funerals, you want to find a point person. That's what I call them. The one that's really the ramrod in the family. I find the point person in the family, and that's the one that I begin to iron out the details of the funeral with. Where, when, whether there'll be visitation the night before or the day of, and then I go over a preliminary order of services. Now, it's something I've noticed in the last few years, about the last 5 years, is that a lot of times people now are doing visitation and the funeral all in one day. They'll have an hour or two of visitation just prior to the funeral service. And the point is this: figure out what they want, and that's what you do. Now, I think it's really important that the one who's doing the funeral, especially if you're the pastor of somebody in your church or somebody connected to your church, you need to be at the visitation. You need to be there because even if it's the night before, you make plans. You're responsible because you got to make yourself available to counsel people, to witness people, to comfort people, and to encourage those that are in attendance. And this visitation, the layout, or whatever you want to call it, it's an important part of the grieving process. It's an important part of connecting with that family. Now, I like to have an order of services. It's right here in this thing. And I do this almost every time unless the family has something different. And listen, folks, when you're doing a funeral, they're going to look to you to do things in an orderly fashion. Because, man, their mind is going a million miles a minute. So you're going to be called upon to give them some structure and some order. I tell the funeral director, usually they're going to have music right there. If you're not going to have live singing or playing, they'll have music there. So I always ask the family, what kind of songs would you like? And what I like to do is I like to have a song to start the service, because when that song starts, everybody gets quiet, and the focus is on the music. When that's done, then I come to the podium, the lectern, wherever, and I pray. I offer a simple prayer of comfort and grace, asking that God would be with us in the service. And then I'll usually read some scriptures. I like reading Psalm 23 if I'm not preaching on Psalm 23. I like using scriptures that are a blessing and encouragement and familiar. The one thing you don't want to do at a funeral is try to be unique. All right? You don't want to bring out some new special doctrine that these folks here have never heard. You think you're the bastion of truth, and you got to make sure they get all 5 points at this funeral. No, I'm going to tell you, you keep it simple. You keep it direct. You keep it on point. I normally read the obituary. Sometimes, especially if I know people, and I know them pretty well, I'll offer some words about that individual. Now, I know there's some I've heard people say, you should never say nothing about the person. It's all about preaching the gospel. Well, listen, I've done enough funerals to know that there's not a cut and dried method. You need, in your mind, you want to glorify God first and foremost. But you also want to be a blessing to these people. You want to be a help to them. You want to connect with them. You want to encourage them. So then usually what I do is I have another psalm right in the middle. Because normally people are going to ask for a couple of songs. And then I preach a message. Now listen, this is not the time to preach a 50-minute message on the ins and outs of particular redemption. Okay? When I preach a funeral, it's 15 minutes. I rarely ever preach longer than 15 minutes. You're not preaching just to your church members. You may have people there that have never stepped foot in church. They've never heard a gospel message. So that's why I keep my funeral service very brief. My message is not going to go over 15 minutes. I tell the funeral director that. I'm going to preach about 15 minutes. My whole service altogether usually lasts about 25 to 35 minutes, depending on how much music there is. And now sometimes what's going to happen is, and this is, you got to beware a little bit, is you're going to run into some funerals where the family's going to say, sister so-and-so wants to say something, or brother so-and-so wants to say something. You got to work them in. All right? You work them in. Now this last message, the last funeral I preached, was a very popular man. He was a county commissioner. And I've been connected to this family for 30 years. His mom and his brother attend the church that I pastor. His brother was saved in a meeting that I held when he was a teenager. And the guy's funeral I was preaching was at this meeting. But anyway, they wanted people that he worked with to be worked in. And I told him, I said, I'm available to do whatever you want me to do. I didn't volunteer to preach the message, but his mother wanted me to preach the message. Well, they had 2 other guys, and I mean, they really gave all this brother's accomplishments, and he was an accomplished man. And one of the first things I got up and said was, I appreciated so much what's been said. And I will tell you this, how important it is now that you know the Savior. Because what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Now, I believe this man was saved. I met the preacher that dealt with him, and I mean, this guy was brilliant. When he studied things out, he wasn't going to make a false profession, humanly speaking. But he had professed probably 6 or 8 months prior to this, but his wife left him, and just his dairy business was going down, and he was selling just everything was falling in around him. Boy, it's hard to deal with those kind of situations. But you got to be ready. Well, then I have prayer and dismissal. Now, another thing that's good to do for the funeral director, make this general order of service, write it out or type it out and give it to him so that he knows exactly what the order of service is and there's no surprises. Now, the funeral service itself. I tell the family and the funeral director what time I'm going to arrive the day before the funeral, or the day of the funeral. Now, I try to arrive about 45 minutes before the service is scheduled to start. Usually, the family's going to be there. There won't be as many people there, but you want to be there. Don't be late. You don't want to be the cause of any unnecessary anxiety the day of the funeral for the family or for the funeral director. All right? That's the last thing they need to be worried about is where's the preacher. So be on time. And I am on time. Brother Cockrell, one time I was late for something. He started calling me the late Tom Ross. But this is something, whether it's a funeral, a wedding, these are things at the very top of your list. You've got to be punctual when it comes to these events. Normally, I'll read the obituary and offer a few observations about the deceased. Now, I always write out a general outline about what I'm going to say about that person. If I'm actually going to say something, I'll write it out. The highlights that I'm going to say. It's really easy. If you don't discipline yourself, you can just chase rabbits all over the place. This is not the time to do it. So you want to stay on point, and because brevity is a treasured commodity at funerals. Now, I try to focus, especially if it's a believer, on the positives on a person's life. I'll tell you something else I think is really important. This is comforting to a family. And that is, you want them to remember this person that's passed, the blessings, the good times that you've had with them, that they've had with them. I always try to mention that because I think it's important that people treasure up those things, and they need to begin doing that right then and there if they're going to make it through the grieving process, because it's a process. Folks, I've been at this, I've been in the gospel ministry for nearly 39 years, and what I've learned is you don't get over death. You don't get over the loss of loved ones. You have to process it. And if that's true for me as a preacher, I guarantee you it's true for the people that you minister to. But I always preach a short, pointed gospel message. Every funeral message I preach, every single one, is evangelistic. And it is easily understood. And I don't prepare a lot of new sermons. I probably have 10 funeral sermons. I've got a folder. All the funerals I've done, sermons that I've preached, because I don't want to break out new things. Now, if I'm led of the Lord to develop a new sermon, I'll do it. But what I found is, I think it's important to keep it simple. Keep it direct. Keep it pointed. And keep it evangelistic. I focus on the depraved condition of man, the brevity of life, and the redeeming work of the Lord Jesus Christ. His death, burial, and resurrection. Now, this is important. And I think it's something that preachers are not doing enough of. But it will give you greater liberty if you will commit to memorizing Scripture, so that when you're preaching, you don't have to just keep flipping through your Bible, but you have Scripture memorized. And you're able to go right there. It'll give you greater liberty. But don't preach long. 15 minutes. You can say a lot if you stay focused and purposeful. Then you close in prayer. You take your place at the head of the casket. You remain there. Normally what happens is you're going to be standing there. People are going to file by the deceased. And some people are going to come by and they're going to shake your hand. Other people are going to give you the stare of death. All right? And believe me, I've had both. I've had people shake my hand and say, wow, I've never heard a gospel message at a funeral, which always tears me up. But then I'll have other people, I mean, it's like if there's a way that they can get to their gun, they'd like to put a bullet in me. Because I really do, I preach the gospel. And I tell people how important it is to know where your soul is going to be for all eternity. Listen, this is a time when people's minds are on death.
Yeah. That's right.
Now, after the funeral director prepares the casket, you're going to lead the casket to the hearse. And you just walk slowly. And the pallbearers are going to help put it in there. And then, under normal circumstances, after that funeral service, then you're going to go to the graveside. And when you go to the graveside, you go right to the hearse, and you wait for the pallbearers, and then you lead them to the plot. And after everybody gathers around, now this is another mistake I think some preachers make. They make the graveside service a big ordeal. Don't. Just make it brief. What I normally do is I just read 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and have prayer. Or 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Just biblical truths about the resurrection. All right? So, and then I also, everything's about Christ. I mean, the resurrection's about Christ. So, I don't make a big ordeal about the graveside. And then I offer prayer and dismiss. Now, I normally stay there till everybody kind of files out. Some people are going to want to ask questions. Then after the service, if your church is providing a dinner for the family, you need to be there. You need to make plans to attend and serve as much as you can. Be a servant. People ought to see you as somebody that's pitching in with them. You're church members. You know, when we have a fellowship meeting, when we furnish dinner, I don't let everybody else do all the work. I pitch right in. And at funerals, I do the same thing, but I make myself available if anybody wants to talk or have questions or needs counsel. I'm probably going to leave time left over for somebody. Jeff could have taken some more time, because I don't have a lot to say about weddings. When Todd called me and said, we want you to do something on funerals and weddings, I told him, I said, well, I don't think I'm very good at that. But I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to really study this out. I can't wait to dig into the Bible and see all the preachers that did weddings in the Bible. You know? What did Jesus do when he officiated a wedding? And I read the whole New Testament, couldn't find it. But the fact is, it is a custom, and in most Christian denominations, the pastor is going to officiate the ceremony. Now, I'm just going to tell you, I haven't done a lot of weddings. My experience is really limited. Under normal circumstances, I've limited myself to officiate the wedding ceremonies of the members and of the extended family of the church that I pastor. I don't do that all the time. One time I had kids that I had in Little League. They were all excited. They were getting married. They didn't attend our church. They were both lost kids. But they loved me. They remembered through Little League, me being at the ball field. They knew I was a preacher. They asked me to do the wedding. I said, sure, I'll do it. Well, it's one of those deals. This is where a mother-in-law and a mother actually got in a fist fight at the wedding rehearsal, man. And I'll tell you what, boy, when the sparks are flying, even before the wedding, you got trouble. I was so glad when that mess was over. Now, if I can give you some general observations. Now, this is something I have at the very end. But there are times when somebody asks you to marry them, and you have personal or doctrinal convictions that won't allow you to say yes. Just tell the couple the truth. Explain why you don't feel that you're the particular man for the job, but don't get argumentative. All right? Ask them to simply respect your position and do it with a good attitude. If you're going to turn down a wedding, don't act like you're superior or that you're going to try to tell them. No, have a good attitude. Don't be argumentative. Just simply say, I just don't feel like I can do it. Okay? I really believe that there's too many preachers that are just looking to be offensive. And you don't want to be that way. Now, some general observations. Your pulpit ministry should include messages on the sanctity of marriage, the roles of husband and wife, and other subjects relating to marriage in the home. And premarital counseling with a couple is far more important than the ceremony itself. I haven't done a lot of weddings, and I'm deficient in this area of my ministry. I need to improve in this area of premarital counseling and scheduling it and so on. But as a general rule, the bride and the groom, along with their respective families, will do a majority of the organizing and planning of the wedding day and the order of service. And in most cases, they're going to request you to oversee the wedding rehearsal, all right, prior to the wedding. Now, like I said, in my experience, that's usually where the sparks fly, all right, at the wedding rehearsal. What happens is you got several people there, especially if it's a larger wedding, and the mother-in-law is saying this. I mean, she's got Disney princesses in her mind, all right? That she's got Disney movies in her mind, how this is all for her little girl. And what happens is it can get really chaotic and unorganized. So what I've found out, you got to step in as diplomatically as possible, all right, and establish some order to get things flowing. And I've successfully navigated every rehearsal so far, with the exception of the one fight. The way I've done it is, combined with the grace of God, my striking good looks, and winsome charm, I've been able to diplomatically guide them through with some order to the service. But you better be prepared for something unexpected at the rehearsal. The night of the rehearsal, the pastor needs to write out the order of the service, so everybody's on the same page. And it's crucial if there's several groomsmen, bridesmaids, flower girls, ring bearers, etc. Inevitably, you're going to have people, well, I want little Johnny and Jeremy both to be our ring bearers. And I want 6 flower girls. Well, you can't just say, that's stupid. Well, I mean, that's how I feel. Who needs a multiplicity of ring bearers? But you got to remember, you're dealing with a major event in somebody's life. You want to be a blessing to them, a help to them. So tone down, your opinion, and try to do your very, very best. Sometimes a couple will want to incorporate a candle or a sand ceremony into the service. But you've got to set the order. Otherwise, it will be chaotic the day of the service. What I normally do, there's always going to be some woman that is either a bridesmaid or something like that, and she'll see to it that people are in order. So you find who that person is and make sure she's got a good head on her shoulders and has a measure of composure. And they'll see that things go pretty smooth. Because really, you're just operating by faith once the ceremony starts. Because you're going out and you may not know what's going on back here. So that's why you need some kind of order. Now again, the day of the wedding, get there an hour beforehand. Everybody, including the pastor, will probably be anxious and nervous. Punctuality eases a lot of tension on the wedding day. Before you marry somebody, make sure that the bride and groom have their wedding license. You're going to need to fill that out, fill your part out after the ceremony. Don't forget to do it. In most states, you've got 30 to 60 days after the ceremony where it has to be filed at the courthouse and so on, or it won't be legal. In Ohio and West Virginia, for example, you have to be registered with the state and licensed to legally perform weddings. I had to do a wedding in West Virginia and found out like a month beforehand that I had to apply for a specific West Virginia license. In Kentucky, all you need to do is say, hey, I'm a preacher. Right. That's why I love Kentucky, man. Yeah, I'm the preacher, man. But there are times when somebody, I've already gone over that. Now, I didn't include any of this. I've got a wedding ceremony that I've used for years. I don't even know where I got it. I just developed it over time. And if you want that wedding ceremony, you can email me at tomross@zoominternet.net. tomross@zoominternet.net. And I'll email you the ceremony that I use. Now, I incorporate into my wedding ceremony the gospel. I incorporate all 3 persons of the Sacred Trinity as approving of marriage. And I quote Scripture, and I specifically, I ad-lib when it comes to Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, the picture of his sacrifice for his bride and so on. But I've got a whole wedding ceremony. My wedding, one great thing why people do like my weddings is they are short. I bet my wedding ceremony and I'm not going to go through it all because nobody here wants to renew their vows, do they? But it doesn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes for the whole wedding ceremony. And that's about it. Let's see if this is that. Yeah, preach the gospel. Let me see what time it is.
3:41.
How about that?
All right. Hang in right there. We have a couple ministers' Bibles, and as I understand, these are specifically for weddings? Is that
Well,
right?
the middle part's got stuff in there about weddings.
Okay.
All right, so.
With you.
Lonnie Edwards. Now, do we put them back in there?
Just
Because you don't want him double dipping?
yeah, we don't want to
I
double
don't
dip.
get nothing else.
There you go, brother. All right, see what else we got here. Steve Evans.
All right.
All right, brother.
Hang on right here. We're going to have some questions for you. Drill time now. Lewis?
So I want to ask a couple of questions, but mainly, especially for some of these young guys, myself included, to think, just to provoke some thought in there. And I'm gonna say this because it sounds, and it will sound insensitive. But people die at inconvenient times. Okay, people die at inconvenient times. If you have a church member who is near death, would you be willing to cancel family vacation, preach a funeral?
Yes. Yeah, I've done it.
Come back from vacation to preach a funeral?
Yep. Now, there've been times when I've been asked to do a funeral for somebody that's not in our church. But even then, most times I try to do whatever I can to do the funeral. But for church members, it's pretty much a standard rule of thumb.
Is there someone that you would not preach a funeral with, another officiant? Say,
I've never done that. I've never even had that. I've done funerals with. I've had to do it with the Methodist. Here's the way I do it. As long as I'm preaching, that's all I care about. If I'm preaching, whatever else goes on, goes on. But I'm going to preach the gospel. So yes, I'd do it nearly with anybody.
have you ever been asked to preach a particular text?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I got a whole sermon on it, ready to go. I'm now ready to be offered. Somebody asked to preach on that text.
I'll ask you. The deceased favorite passage was Psalm 91.
Uh-huh.
They asked me to preach Psalm 91.
Yes, sir.
I just like to interject when it comes to weddings. One thing I try to do at that rehearsal to make things a little simpler is simply look at everyone there and make sure they understand this is the bride's day.
Amen.
Not
That's
your
good.
day.
Good point.
And I don't care what you think, what your opinions are, this bride needs to be happy once they go.
Yeah.
And the groom don't care about it.
Right. That's an excellent point. That's a very excellent point.
Can I add another comment here? My
Yes, sir.
wife is a florist by nature, so we've done a lot of weddings before I was even a pastor. And one of the things, how we begin is having everyone up front lined up in the way they're going to be lined up during the ceremony. And then you exit out of the building in reverse order.
You know,
So then when you
I
get to
didn't
the
even
back-
include that in here, but that's excellent, what he just said.
And when you get to the back, you're already in the order. And so that helps set the order of the way things are gonna be. That has helped tremendously.
Yes. But Matt?
What would be the, maybe one point that you would be different between preaching a funeral of somebody you know is saved and preaching a funeral of which you know that the person was not saved? That there was just simply.
Well,
no
you're
doubt.
gonna find out that a lot of it has to do with how comfortable you feel. That, to me, that's the biggest issue I have, is it's a lot more difficult to preach a lost man's funeral. But I've done a lot of them. But what I try to do is, listen, in those cases, I don't make hardly any references to the man that died. I mean, I use the scriptures as a means of comforting the people there, because they're the only ones you can help. And so, you're gonna feel your level of comfort isn't as, you know, it's not gonna be as much as if you knew that person was saved. But I just stick to the gospel, stick to a salvation message. I don't preach anybody into heaven or hell. I just preach the truth.
What about cremation?
I've had to preach funerals where they were cremated. I don't agree with it, but again, there ain't nothing I can do about somebody that's in a urn of ashes. All I can do is deal with people that are there, and
They're not in the urine, they're gone.
they're gone. And I mean, I had to preach my uncle's funeral, and he was cremated. And believe me, I can't believe they asked me to preach my uncle's funeral. Man, I remember that after I was saved, the only tact I had was a tact. And my uncle was a high-powered lawyer. And I remember I went to his house and I preached the gospel to him, and man, he just said, "Who do you think you are? You've lived like a puke so many years, and now you're come to tell me the way of salvation?" I mean, he really ripped me a new one. And I was done. I thought, wow. Well, he wasn't saved. I mean, but that's what they asked me to do, his funeral, and they had him cremated. I went there and preached on God's greatest gift, and I preached to God, and I had to preach in the community I grew up in, right outside of Cincinnati, Loveland, Ohio, and there was 300 people there. So that's the first time I ever had to preach to somebody that had been cremated. My uncle.
Just FYI, guys, that is becoming a big deal. I was told by a funeral director in certain states it's up to 80%. That's going to become a big deal.
I got another comment, but instead of a question, but whenever I did my first funeral, I was 29 years old, and I knew nothing about doing a funeral, and I was scared to death because of the mourning that was going on. I mean, there was a lot, and I didn't know how I was gonna handle it. And an old pastor came and put his arm around me, and he said, "Mark, I want you to understand something. That mourning is a good thing because it's a sign of love." He said, "How sad would it be for someone to go off into eternity and no one care about them? So the more mourning there is, the more you know that person is loved." And that just made a whole difference for me in the way that I view funerals, because mourning is a good thing because it's love. And so some of these young guys, it helped me.
It's good.
Might help someone else.
But these things are I was never trained to how to do a funeral or a wedding. And the subjects that are being covered in this seminar, I think are really good. That thing that Brother Jason brought out, I'm gonna tell you, he is one of the best at doing that. The first time I ever heard him preach was, we preached together in Columbus where Brother Meyer is pastor, and I'll never forget, he preached on the blind Bartimaeus, the blind beggar being saved. And I'm telling you, man, he made that whole passage just pop. It was powerful. So the good thing about these sessions is it challenges us to do better, to be better. Mike?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, one of the things that, you hinted to this, and again, like you said, a lot of them are different now, they're doing it all at once, but usually there's an hour at least prior to public visitation with the family. What I've always done, made sure I'm there at that time, met with the family, had prayer, let them know, maybe some incentive who didn't know me personally, who I was, made myself available to them, then and afterwards, had prayer with them, and then led them into, instead of me coming in and them already getting there with the body and everything.
That's good.
Use an opportunity again to let them know who you are in case they want to counsel with you later. And then again, just give